Bulovinoka to all our viewers tuning into our webinar tonight. And as we all know, this is the South Pacific Society of Lifestyle Medicine, an organization that is very much dedicated to bringing together individuals, organizations, just to effectively combat this pandemic that we are all facing together, that is non-communicable disease, which is sweeping across the South Pacific. And South Pacific Society of Lifestyle Medicine seeks to promote the education and training of health professionals in the use of these evidence-based approaches to address the root cause of these diseases. And one of the main things that we like to start off with all our presentation, and one of the basic things that the South Pacific Society of Lifestyle Medicine stands for, that is the lifestyle medicine itself. And the definition, which is lifestyle medicine, is the evidence-based practice of helping individuals and communities with the comprehensive lifestyle changes that includes nutrition, physical activity, stress management, social support, and environmental exposures, all to help prevent, treat, and even reverse the progression of chronic diseases by addressing underlying causes. And that is the definition of lifestyle medicine for us. And moving on, the South Pacific Society of Lifestyle Medicine will be having a conference next year. You can take note of the date, and it's happening from the 10th to the 12th of March, 2020, and the venue is at the Pearl Resort Pacific Harbor. And to all our viewers that are tuning in from all over the Pacific that are not in Fiji, it's here at the Pearl Resort in Deumba in Fiji. So if this is something that you would like to attend, you can go onto our website to learn more about our SPSLM conference that will be happening next year. Now, tonight we have our presenter is Dr. Alipate Vakamocea, and I'm sure for most of us tuning in, he is not a new face. We see him almost every now and then. He's been part of many health segments and TV shows here in Fiji, for at least. Dr. Alipate is the health director of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He graduated with an MBBS from Fiji School of Medicine and went on to do his postgrad and diploma of OBGYN, and he's also on his last lap in completing his postgraduate diploma in lifestyle medicine at Avondale University College in New South Wales. Apart from that, he is also the facilitator for CHIP, and he has helped a lot of people here in Fiji with the help of the program of the Complete Health Improvement Program to help them combat non-communicable diseases. And in a few cases that we've seen, he's also helped them actually eradicate non-communicable disease from their life. But apart from that, he's also into normal things that we are all also interested in. He likes to ride his bike. He has a bike, and he likes hanging out with his family, and he greatly enjoys adventures that in nature, mostly like camping, hiking, going to the beach, and fishing. That's just to name a few. And just a quick reminder to all our audience that are tuning in, if you have any questions for Dr. Pate during his presentation, you're all welcome to send in your question via the chat box, or you can even ask him afterwards, after his presentation. So without further ado, let's invite Dr. Alipate to begin his presentation for us tonight on Genes Are Not Your Fate.
Okay, Bulavinaka everyone. This is Pate checking in from Sydney. I'm just trying to get my screen to cooperate. And as soon as we do this, we'll begin our presentation. Okay, awesome. Can you all see that? Sarah, can you see that? Yes?
Yeah,
okay, good.
Now I can see it.
All right, awesome. Okay, so this is a very interesting topic on genetics, and I'm sure at the end of this presentation, if anything, I hope you get confused a little bit more, and that will stimulate you to go and read up on this topic and make sure that you understand the principles very well. Okay, so we will be presenting to you today about a fascinating, shall we say, controversy, which has developed over the past couple of years. And this is the nature versus nurture debate. Now, in summary, there are two sides. The first side is the nature supporters. Now, according to the nature supporters, human beings are slaves to your genes. Yeah, everything was basically written in your DNA before you were born, and you or I can't change that. It's basically who you are, and your destiny, sorry, has been pre-planned. Okay, so it's a bit morbid. They're saying basically you're born with particular traits that will eventually lead to your who you become, and eventually your demise. So that's the nature part. The nurture part. Now, this is a group of supporters who have a slightly different view. They say that what's more important is the environment that you grow up in, or the environment that you're exposed to, which plays a more important role than what you're being born with. And so they summarize this by saying your destiny is what you make of it, depending on the environment that you were nurtured in. Yeah, so basically the environment that you were nurtured in impacts your destiny. So this is the debate. So feel free to weigh in on this. Which is more important, your genes or the environment surrounding you? Now, we need to start, if we're talking about the nature argument, we need to start by looking at Charles Darwin. And so everybody knows Charles Darwin, the Darwinism, the theory of evolution. And so Darwin was around in the early 1800s, and he basically stated that all species of an organism arise and develop through the natural selection, okay, natural selection of small inherited variations that increase an individual's ability to cope, survive, and reproduce. So basically, he believed in this theory of survival of the fittest. Yeah, survival of the fittest, the fastest, the strongest, that sort of thing. And that's the way nature works, so that you only have the strong survive, yeah? So the crux of Darwin's theory of evolution focuses on the elimination of an inferior species. And this happens gradually over time. And this means that a particular gene that allowed you to survive was passed on, and the inferior one would naturally be blocked or removed. Okay, so just according to that picture, it's interesting because the last one looks like Donald Trump. Right? Sorry for those Americans. Anyway, okay. Now in 2003, there was a project called the Human Genome Project, and this was officially completed in 2003. And basically, we're now able to sequence the entire human DNA. And today we have a better understanding of how our genes determine many of our characteristics, ranging from, your eye color to the likelihood of you becoming a serial killer, right up to even the diseases that we are predisposed to. So we know a lot of information about our genes and how it affects our health. Now, there's an interesting article published in the Journal of Molecular Psychiatry in 2014, which looked at the genetic relationship of extremely violent people. Now, this article talks specifically about two genes, the MAOA and the CHD13. Now, when you read the article, it talks about two independent Finnish cohorts of prisoners. So they looked at prisoners, and particularly violent prisoners and those who were not so violent. And what they noticed was, in the group of violent prisoners, they noticed that you had this particular gene that was expressed, two genes in fact, the MAOA and the CDH13. And it was noticed that the expressions of these particular genes seemed to be prevalent in the violent offenders, and they were sort of absent in the non-violent prisoners. Okay, so in fact, if you read some of the studies on specifically MAOA, it's referred to as warrior genes. And just as a side, I did a bit of research on this, and we found that in males, if the MAOA gene is expressed, they become these really warrior, aggressive kind people. But it's interesting, in females, they are happy. So if you're one of those females that's, probably got a violent tendency, you probably don't have this warrior gene. I just thought that was interesting. Another interesting aspect. Now, raise your hand if you've ever tried smoking a cigarette. Raise your hand. Okay, so I am counting all of the people who have raised their hands, and I think it's safe to say that most of us have tried to smoke. But have you ever thought about why it is that some people try cigarettes and dislike them, and some people try cigarettes and are addicted, to the nicotine lifelong? Well, apparently it turns out that our genes have a big part to play in this as well. So just very quickly, when you smoke a cigarette containing tobacco, the nicotine is very quickly aerosolized and it enters your lungs. From your lungs, it gets transferred to your blood and very quickly into your heart, straight to your brain, bypassing the blood-brain barrier. Now, when the nicotine gets into your brain, it connects to these receptors called nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Once it connects there, it opens up a gateway that allows the dopamine to come in. And you know that dopamine are feel-good hormones. And this increases your craving. Once the dopamine hormones drop, then you have the craving and you want to take you want nicotine again. Now, interesting thing is that there's actually smoking genes. You see that on the side, ChRNA5, ChRNA3, and ChRNB4. Now, what scientists noticed is the people who tend to get addicted to tobacco or to nicotine, they've actually got these three genes expressed a lot. And what the genes do is the genes increase the number of those nicotinic receptors. So the more receptors you have in your brain, the more the dopamine comes out, is stimulated. Whereas for those of us who've tried smoking and we're like, yeah, no, that's not for me. It's likely that we have less of these receptors. And that's clinically important because in terms of addiction, the more receptors you have, the more addicted you become. So that's the connection between genetics and something as simple as smoking. Now, we're about to end the month of October, and by now we've become familiar with this particular gene, the BRCA1 and BRCA2. Now, these are genes which are found in all humans, and these are genes that actually are supposed to have prevented the development of breast cancer. And scientists have discovered that when you get a particular mutation to either of these genes, the incidence or your chance of developing breast cancer increases phenomenally. In fact, it's not just breast cancer, but they've also noticed that ovarian cancer, your chances of developing ovarian cancer also increases if you have mutated BRCA1 or BRCA2 genes. And the sad thing is that this mutation can also be passed down to first-degree relatives, so to your offspring and so on and so forth. So if you have breast cancer in the family, it's actually likely that you have the BRCA gene positive and your risk of breast and ovarian cancer is high. And this lady has probably been one of the most famous people when it comes to the BRCA gene mutation, and everyone knows her, Angelina Jolie. Angelina didn't actually have breast cancer. And a lot of people think that she did, but she actually didn't. So she didn't have breast or ovarian cancer. However, her mom passed away of breast cancer at a very young age. And when she heard about the genetic predisposition, she decided to get tested. And lo and behold, she had a genetic mutation on both BRCA1 and 2. So she took control of her situation and she had both organs removed. So she had a bilateral mastectomy and a bilateral oophorectomy. And that's why she says there in the quote, she says, life comes with many challenges. And the ones that should not scare us are the ones that we are able to take control of. So that's Angelina Jolie and her experience with the BRCA genes. Now, the problem with gene mutations, again, as I mentioned, is that it passes on down to your first-degree relatives, your children and your grandchildren. And so these are some of the genetic mutations. Just one little mutation in the genetic sequence can cause an abnormal protein to be born. And some of the famous diseases mutations are there: cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, even Down syndrome, and breast cancer, as I have mentioned, and even certain types of diabetes, and in fact, certain types of heart disease. And in fact, that they're saying now that even there's such a thing as a diabetic gene. And so again, this underscores the argument from the nature people that, you know, basically your genes are your fate, and you've got, you know, nothing else. You can do nothing about it. Just learn about your genes, and, you know, in some instances, like with Angelina Jolie, you have to take proactive action to prevent your fate. Now, the good news is that this is not entirely true. And there's a new study called epigenetics. And epigenetics is basically the study of gene activity. Now, what they discovered you know, many years ago when they were looking at the DNA code is they found that there's a whole bunch of DNA which they had referred to as rubbish code, because it didn't actually code for a particular protein. And so for many years, it was pushed to the side. And then a bunch of scientists started to look at this rubbish code, and then they realized that it was there for a reason. And this is how the study of epigenetics sort of came about. When they started studying, you know, genetic code in detail, they realized that this rubbish code actually had a big part to play on something called gene expression. Okay, and that's where this whole idea of epigenetics comes about, because you can have a particular gene, but the expression of the gene can be controlled. Okay, interested? Okay, keep listening. So this was obviously published in the Time magazine in 2010, and it just highlighted how gene expression, you know, the ability to turn it on or off, now opens up many possibilities, especially as far as you know, diseases and things are concerned. All right. Now let's talk about these cute little furry creatures, and everybody loves mice. Now, why do scientists like studying mice? Because they contain up to 98% of the genetic material in mice is the same as humans. And so that's why we like to experiment on these furry little creatures. Now, a group of scientists got together, and they developed a mouse which is called an agouti mutant. Okay, so this particular orange mouse here has a gene switched on. It's called the agouti gene, and what the agouti gene does is it gives the mice nice yellow coats. It makes them obese. It gives them diabetes. But it also creates, makes them have short lives. So in 2003, some scientists, Waterland and Jertel, they decided to mess around with these mice. And so they randomly assigned agouti mice into two groups, okay? So again, these were mice that had the agouti gene, and they both had the agouti gene was expressed. So divided them into two groups. One group, he fed them the normal mouse food. The other group, were fed food that was fortified with folic acid, vitamin B12, and choline chloride, as well as anhydrous betadine. Now, these particular foods, they added methyl group to DNA. Now, keep that in the back of your head. They caused methylation of the DNA. Okay. Now, the particular mice were fed different diets from the 8th week of their life, so very early in their life, and throughout their life. So, you know, the mice got married, they got pregnant, and they had their babies. Now, the interesting thing was when they examined the babies of these agouti mice. Now, the babies of the agouti mice who were fed the normal mouse food, they looked exactly like the mouse in the picture. But the mice, the babies of the mice that were fed those the food that caused methylation of the DNA, this is what they look like. You see the difference? So the interesting thing about these two mice, putting them side by side like that, is both the mice have the agouti gene. Okay, they both have the agouti gene, but obviously one of them, the gene is not expressed. Isn't that awesome? So it's the one on the right. So you could you have a look at the page and you can see. So the one on the right, it has the agouti gene, but it's got a brown coat. It's not obese. It has no diabetes, and they have normal lifespan. Now, the interesting thing is this even passed on to the next generation. Again, they had the agouti gene, but the agouti gene was not expressed Interesting. Just by changing certain aspects of the diet of the parents, the gene managed to switch off. Remember, I told you to keep that in the back of your mind. Methylation. They caused methylation to show that the gene had switched off. That's one aspect of gene switching. Another one is this one. So when you're talking about nature, again, back to that discussion in the beginning, the nature says, they say that our genetics determines our behavior, personal traits, blah, blah, blah. But with the nurture, we're talking about more the environment, and we are nurtured to behave in a certain way. So again, this is an article published in 2004 by Weaver et al., looking at mice again, but this time at the behavior of the mice and how it relates to its gene expression. So as you can see, you got two groups of mice over there. On the left, you have the mummy mice, which looked after their little cubs. And if you notice at the bottom, they had a particular gene, which because of the way that their mother cared for them, it turned the gene off. Whereas when you look at the mice on the right, the mother didn't really take care of her mouse. She was always on Facebook and on social media. So her mouse was left to fend for himself. And if you noticed, he had a particular gene, and that particular gene, the expression, was switched on. So this is another example of how we can start to switch off genes, or we can start to switch on genes, all depending on changing the environment. So again, this is 1.4, the fact that the way you nurture someone, your environment, can have a profound impact on the expression of your genes. But I know what you're thinking. You're probably saying, yeah, but Pate, that's only in mice. Well, this is an interesting one. So this is a particular study that was done looking at prostate cancer and the expression of the gene. Again, very similar to the first group of mice. This was the study done by Dr. Dean Ornish. And so Dr. Dean Ornish got a whole bunch of patients who had prostate cancer. And so they obviously had high PSAs. PSA is a prostate-specific antigen, which is one of the biomarkers for cancer. So both these groups had high PSAs. And then he divided the groups into two. One group got the conventional treatment that we give for prostate cancer, but the second group, he gave an intensive lifestyle modification. So this is, a plant-based diet with stress management, exercise, social support groups, etc., etc. And what he found was that the group that had the normal, treatment in prostate cancer, they continued to have their prostate gene expressed, okay? But the group that had done the lifestyle intervention, remember we spoke about this methylation? They had methylation of their DNA. And if you can understand that diagram very briefly, you see that where the DNA is, the telomeres, they sort of tighten a lot. And so that gene is not expressed, which means the gene is silent. They still have the gene for prostate cancer, but it's silent. Okay, so exactly like the studies in the mice. So Dr. Dean Ornish et al. Managed to prove or demonstrate that even if you have this gene for cancer, if you're able to change nutrition, your environment, and all those things, you actually can get in control of that gene and switch off genes that you don't want, the bad gene. And in this case, it was the prostate cancer gene. So really that brings us to relook at this whole is your DNA your destiny? And like how Dean Ornish presented, if you make changes, very specific changes to your lifestyle, especially with the food that you eat and your environment, you will be able to control the expression of bad genes. Now remember that the science of this is still very, very early, but as time goes by, more studies are being done, and we're beginning to learn more about epigenetics and how it is that we can start working on our genes to switch off the bad genes and possibly switch on good genes. So not only do we reduce violent people, and maybe even be able to reduce the number of people entering our prisons, but we could also start to control non-communicable diseases like cancer, not just that, but even lifestyle choices, like adjust the number of people choosing to smoke, for example. And there's even some talk about them becoming a vaccination for smoking. But you can start to see that when you understand, if we finally do get on the top of epigenetics, this is going to be huge for medicine in the future. So I'd like to suggest that we start to consider the fact that we shouldn't be tied down by the types of genes we have. So many times we're seeing our patients and we tell them, you might want to try and lose a bit of weight, or you got a bit of high blood pressure, you need to get control of that. And they turn around to me and they turn around to us and they go, doctor, we can't do it because our mothers had high blood pressure, our family had it, so we're going to have it. There's nothing we can do. We can start to tell them, no, there is. Your genes are definitely not your fate. So to conclude, I think we've been able to at least plant the seed of doubt in your mind. And again, if you're not convinced by this, that's awesome. Go ahead and do your readings and learn about, this is my conclusion. I believe that our genes are not our fate. And I believe that we have the ability to nurture and change our nature. But at the end of the day, the power is yours. These are my references. Thank you very much for attending our webinar. And we look forward to doing some more presentations for you in the very near future. Okay, and back to Sarah. Oh yes, if anybody has any burning questions, feel free to switch on your mic and ask a question. Or if you're a little bit shy, you can use the chat options, which is in the toolbar at the bottom. But again, this will be put on our website, and you can always feel free to send us emails and ask us later. And I'm handing over back to Sarah.
Sorry, I think my mic was mute, but we've come to the end of our presentation. If you would like to know more, as Dr. Pate said, you have any burning question, feel free to drop by on our website, www.spslm.org. And if you know anyone that would benefit from what we've learned tonight in our presentation, you can direct them to our recording, that this particular session will be recorded. And you can also tell your friends about our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn page. And that is it for us tonight. And we hope to have you on our next webinar session. Naka.